Okay, so this is going to be a video to complement the article I wrote about the ultimate guide for reading files in Java. So in this video, I'm just going to go over the code samples that are included in the article, and I'm going to link to the article in the description of the video. So if you're watching this in the video, you can click over to the article, and if you're watching this inside the article, then of course everything is right there for you. So before we begin with the code samples, I got all the code samples here. There's going to be 15 different code samples that I'm going to go through with you just to show you all the different ways that you can read files in Java, because I want this to be kind of a comprehensive list. So I'm just going through the article now. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but just a couple of things before we start with the code samples. I tested this in JDK in Java 7, 8, and 9. Also, this is the list of all the methods that we're going to be going through that are doing all the reading. The other thing I wanted to mention is because in JDK 7, you don't have to manually close files anymore like you did before. So I'm going to be using the try with resources statement in all the code samples. So it's going to make the code samples a lot smaller and simpler to understand. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do different encodings. Like I'm going to do UTF like with explicit encoding set and with just using the default encoding. So you're going to see that in the examples. And also the code is downloadable from GitHub. And one last thing, and that's this section here. And this isn't, these code samples are not really meant to be used in production. This is just to demonstrate how to use the methods. So we're not using, object-oriented concepts here. We're not doing encapsulation. I wanted to make these examples as easy to understand as possible. So everything is going to be done in the main method. And that's really the purpose of these examples. It's not really to show you kind of amazing object-oriented code. It's just to show you how to use the file reading method, so then you can use them in your own code. And the exception handling. As far as exception handling, it's going to be just declared that the main method throws whatever exceptions the file reading methods could throw. Again, there was no point to just show useless try-catch blocks where all the catch block does is just spit out the stack trace. That's not really useful for there was no point in showing that, because I figure the people that are reading this and watching this, they know how to try and they know how to catch their own exceptions. So I just put the exceptions in the throws declaration for the main method, and you're going to see that in the examples. Okay, so without further ado, let's start on the file reading methods. So this is all the files here. There's 15 files. This is in my Eclipse project. All the files are downloadable from GitHub. There's a link. If you're watching this on YouTube, then there's a link to the main article on my website, funnelgarden.com. And if you're watching this on the website, then obviously you have the link there in the article. All right, so let's start with the first method here, which is the buffered file reader. So again, I'm just going to go through these examples just to show you how easy it is. First thing is we specify where the file is. That's over here. Then we create a FileInputStream object, and we give it the string, which is where the file is, and then we wrap that FileInputStream, we wrap it inside of an InputStreamReader. And this example is using explicit encoding, so we specify that it's UTF-8 encoding. And then finally, we wrap the InputStreamReader inside the BufferedReader. This is where it's using the try with resources statement over here. Okay, so this automatically will close the BufferedReader, which closes the underlying InputStreamReader and the FileInputStream underneath it. So, okay, so all you do is you create the new BufferedReader with the InputStreamReader. You then can just use the readLine method to read a line at a time of the buffered reader, which will give you the string, and then until it gets to the end of the file, then it'll be null. And then you can do whatever you want with that string. You can print it out, you can append it to a string builder, whatever object you want, and that's it. That's how you use the buffered reader with encoding. So the next example is going to be the buffered reader without the encoding, just specifying it'll just use the default encoding on your system. Oh, and let me just run this just to kind of show you what it looks like. So if I run it, you're going to see the output here. This is the sample file. This is just a 10 kilobyte file. In the article, I actually run performance tests against 7 different size files, all the way like from 1 kilobyte all the way to 1 gigabyte. And then I actually do performance tests on them, so then I can see which file reading methods are the best or the fastest. So for these examples, I just wanted to keep it to a relatively small file. It's just 10 kilobytes. Okay, the next example is the same buffered reader, but no encoding specified. As you can see, it's even simpler. So we specify the file name, the FileReader object, and then we have the buffered reader again with a FileReader inside of it. So because we're using we had to, in the other example, FileReader doesn't take a character encoding explicitly. That's why you had to use the parent class, which is the InputStreamReader, I believe. And then if you just want to use buffered reader with a default encoding, you can just use a FileReader object, and that will automatically use the default encoding on your system. And then here you can again just use the readLine method. It's going to keep reading 1 line at a time until it gets to null, and then you just print it out. Okay, let's go to the next one, which is the BufferedInputStream. So this one can be used to read characters or bytes. So for this one, you specify the file name here. We create a file object. Okay, then we create the FileInputStream and give it that file object, and then we wrap the FileInputStream. Let me just move this over here. We wrap the FileInputStream inside of the BufferedInputStream. Okay, and then what we do here is it's only reading 1 character at a time. So it's not the best way to read it, but it's definitely doable to read it this way. You could just read 1 character at a time, and it keeps reading until it gets to -1. Let me just run it so you can see what it looks like. So there it is. Okay, so it's just outputting that 1 character at a time. All right, so now let's go to this example. This example actually is using the Apache Commons IO library, which is a third-party library. So I imported the library right here. And what we're doing is we're using the readlines method of the FileUtils class. Now, as you can see, you have to specify the encoding here explicitly. It doesn't let you, or I think it's deprecated to just use the default encoding. So you have to specify the encoding explicitly. Here it's UTF-8, and what it's doing is it's reading in all of the file in 1 call, and it's just giving us a list of strings of all the contents of that file, and then you can just go through that list of strings and just output the lines 1 by 1, which I'm gonna demonstrate here. There we go. Okay. Next example is FileInputStream, which is let me just show you here. So it's in the IO package, and again we're going to create the file name, then we're going to create the file object. So now all we're doing is creating the FileInputStream and giving it the file object, and what it's doing is it's reading in 1 character at a time, or one byte at a time, until it gets to -1. Now, for the purposes of this example, I just cast it to a char because I know it's a text file, but this can be used to read bytes as well, so they don't have to be readable characters. And here we're just outputting that character 1 at a time. So if I run this file here it is. that's the contents of that file. Okay, the next one is FileReader. So this one, let me expand the import so you can see it. Okay. This one's using the InputStreamReader. So yeah, because the FileReader doesn't have a way to specify the encoding. So this was a way to you have to use the parent class, which is the InputStreamReader, and there you could specify the encoding. But if you wanted to use a FileReader with encoding, you can't do that directly. So that's why I named it FileReader. But either way, you can basically create the file input stream. Then it reads one character at a time, which is right here using the read method until it gets to a -1. Again, I'm casting that character to a char, so that way you can see what it looks like, because I know that this is a text file. It doesn't have to be a text file though. This can read binary file as well. And then we just output that character. I'm going to run this now. Okay, there it is. Now, this one is FileReader where you don't specify the encoding. So here you can it'll just use the system encoding on your machine. And that's where we just create the FileReader object with a string file name, and it just reads in one character at a time, which is here, similar to the last example. And we're casting it to a char because we know it's a text file, and we're just displaying it. And if I run it, it's right there. Okay, so now the next one I'm going to do is I'm going to do the default encoding first before I do the one where you specify the encoding. This is using the new IO classes from Java since JDK 7, I believe. So it's this one right here, java.nio.file.files. And this files class has a few static methods that you can use to read files. So in this example, we're using the lines method, and it needs a path object to get to that file. And that's why we get that path object by creating a file object over here, and then just calling toPath, and that will create the path object. Now, this gives us a stream of strings, and here we have to use a lambda expression to go through that stream of strings. This doesn't actually work on JDK 7, and I explain that more in the article. But for this example, I'll just run it so you can see it. I also have a link in there for a much better explanation of how to use lambda expressions. But for our purposes, I'm running this actually on JDK 9, so this will work for JDK 8 and 9, and it'll output one line at a time. And if we run it, there it is. Okay, so now if we do the same method but with encoding specified, so that would be right here on this line number 12. So it's very similar to the last example. You need a path object to the file, but then you also specify the encoding, which is this. I'm using UTF-8. And then and let me just show you the import so you can see this standard char set enum that we're using here to specify the encoding. And that's it. And then it's gonna have a stream of strings, and we're just outputting one line at a time for this stream of strings. Let me run it for you. And there it is. Okay, now we're gonna do another example, another method from that same files class called readAllBytes. So readAllBytes, this actually was one of the best. I think this was the best method out of all of them as far as speed. This was just an incredibly fast method to use, because it read everything from 1 kilobyte to 1 gigabyte in a relatively very fast way. And even though the documentation says It's not meant for large files. I found in my testing that this actually works very well for larger files. Anyway, and if you go in the article, you'll see like I made some graphs, and I have like data there to show how this compares to the other methods. Okay, so then what we're doing here is we're calling files.readAllBytes, and we're passing a path object to the file, and it's giving you basically an array of bytes of everything in that file. And all we're doing now is we're just going through that array of bytes, and we're in this case casting it because we know it's a text file, and just printing it out to the console. So here's the output. Now, we're going to do the same example, but now specifying the encoding explicitly. So that's this example right here. So here, it's very similar to the last one, except what we're doing is we're saying read all lines, path to the file, but now we're using standard char set, and that's again this guy over here, standard char sets, and we're saying that it's UTF-8. And now we're getting a list of strings. Oh, I'm sorry. I screwed that one up. This is read all lines, not read all bytes. So read all lines is giving us a list of strings of all the contents of that file. Not so this is for text files, whereas read all bytes was for it could be binary or text file. So read all lines is now we're using that for reading in a text file, but we're using that same static that class files in the Java nio.file package, and we're saying read all lines with the path to the file, and we're saying use the UTF encoding. We're getting a list of strings, and let me just erase that. It's not important. And we're saying go through that list of strings and just print them out one at a time. And there it is. So now we're going to do read all lines, but without the encoding. And that's this one right here. So what we're doing is we're saying read all lines and just a path to that file. And that's it. And it gives us, again, just a list of strings for each line in that file. And we're going through that list and printing it out one at a time. And then if we run this, there it is. Okay, the next example is another third-party library, which is Google Guava. So the Guava library has some utility methods for file reading, and I wanted to show them for you guys to see, as well as test it against the other file reading methods that Java has. And again, in the article, I compared it to the other file reading methods, so you can see how it performs against them. And from what I remember, it wasn't actually one of the better performers. It was sort of in the middle. There were a few native Java file reading methods that were better than both Google Guava as well as Apache Commons IO. So let's take a look at how to do that. So first of all, we're going to import the, so these are the two classes to import, and so this com.google.com and .io files, and that's what we're using here. We're using the readlines method, and it forces you to specify an encoding, so we're using the UTF-8 encoding, and that's, again, that's from their own charset class, which is here. And again, it gives you a list of strings of all the lines in that file, and we're just going to go through that list and just print them out one at a time. If we run it, it's right there. Okay, now we're back down to the last two. So the last example is using Scanner. So Scanner, I know a lot of people use it to get user input from the console, and it can, definitely can be used for that, but it can actually be used to read from files as well. So if we look at the example here, how it's used, it's in the Java util package, and what we're doing is we're going to create a file object and give it a string to where the file exists. We're going to create the scanner object and pass it the file. So here you could pass it system.out system.in, and then that would read the console. But in this case, we're passing it a file, and it'll read the file. So you can use this method hasNextLine to check that there is a next line, and it's going to keep saying true until it gets to the end of the file, and then keep reading in one line at a time, just using that scanner.nextLine method, and we just print out the line to the console. All right, let's run this. Okay, and now we're going to do the same thing for the scanner, but with an encoding. So let me show you here. Again, we're using the same scanner class, but this time we're specifying UTF-8 encoding right here. So if we want to be explicit, but as far as using it, everything else stays the same. We, again, you put it in a while loop and check that it has a next line, and then call next line to get the next line from the scanner, and we just print out the next line right here. Okay. And let's run that. And that's it. Okay, so that is, those are the 15 examples that I wanted to show you. I go through with them, and again, the code samples in the article, I have the code samples, and I also do a performance test on all of these methods, and show you kind of what was the best performer and what was the worst performer, because I wanted to see, because obviously there's so many different ways to read files in Java, and often when you might just be searching for a way to read files in Java, whatever article you come up with, like, you might just see like one, maybe two ways, but in reality there's actually quite a lot of ways to read files in Java. So I wanted to test them all and see how they stack up against each other. Okay, the link for the article is going to be below, and by all means comment below if you have any questions or comments, and if you like this kind of stuff, I will be putting out more tutorials like this, so make sure to like and subscribe, and thank you very much.